It seems that we have on time. Chris, would you like to have a short opening speech?
Yes, Hakan, I'll kick off. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever everybody is. I'm based in Buenos Aires, so it's early afternoon for us. Welcome to this third installment of Ikuch's webinar series. I know they've proven to be popular and interesting, and I have absolutely no doubt that the meeting today, the two speakers today will enthrall us with their experiences in two very different parts of the world. First by Marc-Andre in Canada, and second Alok in India. They both have similarities insofar as they're both huge countries with huge coastlines. But I'm particularly familiar with Marc-Andre's expeditions. I've known Marc-Andre for many years. We've worked together on projects here in Patagonia. So he's not been quite to the Antarctic yet, but maybe there's still time to do that in the not too distant future. And we're both keeping our fingers crossed that we can have a joint mission there sometime. But I know Marc-Andre, I've heard him speak on the Arctic shipwrecks, and they include the famous Franklin expeditions and the searches for them, the wrecks of those ships. They're always fascinating. I learn something new every time I see them. The photographic memories of the expedition, both on surface and underwater, are just spectacular. And I'm really excited to welcome Marc-Andre to the third webinar and to kick off this afternoon's presentations. Marc-Andre, Hakan, unless you've got something to add. Oh yes, you've got Marc-Andre's bio. Hakan, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Marc-Andre Bernier is the manager of the Parks Canada's underwater archaeology team, the only government team in Canada. He has worked in Parks Canada since 1990, but has also participated in international projects included in France, Mexico, Argentina, and the United States. Parks Canada is presently conducting archaeological work on the Franklin 1845 expedition shipwrecks, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror in Canadian Arctic.
Okay, so thank you, Hakan. Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. So I'll try to share my screen here and let me know if. Okay. How is that? Can you see this?
I can see you, yes.
But can you see this slide?
Yep, I can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so title of the presentation is Shipwrecks in Arctic Environments, but I kind of added a bit of a subtitle. This is going to be the Canadian perspective. Obviously, Canada is not the only country with a Arctic territory or land. So there are other shipwrecks elsewhere, Greenland, United States, and there's also shipwrecks in the southern hemisphere. Maybe not that many in Antarctic environments, but subpolar, as in Patagonia, conditions are very similar than what you'll find in Arctic environments as well. But I'll focus on the Canadian shipwrecks. And what I'd like to do today is basically to give you kind of an introduction to Arctic underwater and maritime archaeology. So basically, this is what I hope to go through today. Just the main themes that we're dealing with when you deal with Arctic research underwater in the Canadian Arctic. The logistics, people, not too many people are maybe familiar with what it takes to work in the Arctic. It's quite complex. So I'll give you a very brief overview of that. But it is worth working in the Arctic because you do have preservation of remains, which are incredible, as you can see on the photograph of this slide. I'll briefly talk on the threats to the integrity of archaeological sites. This is a big concern. The Arctic is a changing environment, and it's one of the places where changes occur for climate, in particular, changes occur quicker than anywhere else. And we'll finish with Inuit leadership in heritage protection. So basically, we have quite a few shipwrecks in the Arctic. What you see here is a map of some of the shipwrecks that have been located, and a few among those that are still missing. Fewer in Victory and other, among others, but there's quite a few more. Whatever is in red is underwater. Green is our ship remains on land, and the blue is what is not found. So you can see there's over a dozen shipwrecks. I've included subarctic wrecks like the Red Bay wrecks and the Princess because the conditions are so similar, and they actually complete the story of Arctic maritime history. So the first part of the presentation will briefly go through some of the Arctic research themes for underwater archaeology and maritime history archaeology. The four being exploration, whaling, trading, and Inuit traditional activities. I'll show you the same map of the shipwrecks showing color-coded sites, whether red in exploration, green in whaling, and blue for trade activities. You will see that the green, the whaling activities are basically along the shore of eastern Canada and Greenland, between eastern Canada and Greenland. That's where the whaling occurred. Whalers did not venture into the archipelago where they would, where the ice would have either keep them from entering or more importantly, keep them from exiting. And you can see the red, the exploration shipwrecks are obviously inside the archipelago. And there's a reason that they were trying to find the Northwest Passage from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and many ships were lost trying to do that. And the trade vessels are actually way inside. They're more recent, and they were actually wintering a lot of the times inside the Arctic, hence their presence right in the middle. So exploration, the most famous ships of Arctic exploration in Canada are the Erebus and Terror from the 1845 Franklin expedition, which was the biggest expedition to find the Northwest Passage launched by England. The two ships were found in excellent condition, as we will see later, in 2014 for Erebus and 2016 for Terror. But there's other ships linked to the Franklin expedition. Following their disappearance, there was a massive attempt to locate the ships, save the crews, and what we are seeing here is an image of HMS Investigator, HMS Enterprise in 1848. Investigator was lost in 1853 after attempting a second entering of the Arctic. And was located by our team in 2010 in the western part of the Arctic. There's supply ships that were coming in to support these search expeditions. So we see here Breadalbane, which was not a Navy ship, but it was a contracted ship to bring supplies to the Belcher expedition and was lost. And this one here was not an Arctic exploration ship. It wasn't built for the Arctic like the other ones. And when the ice took hold of it, it sank down in less than 15 minutes. The ice just punched a hole through it. It was just not reinforced for the Arctic. There are shipwrecks, exploration shipwrecks from England that came before Franklin. We see here a cache from HMS Fury, which has not been found yet. The wreck has not been found, but the Fury sank in 1834, and the Victory engine, which was another expedition, which actually located for the first time the magnetic North Pole under James Ross' command. They had a steam engine which they abandoned on shore because it wasn't working properly in Arctic conditions. And that is still visible today. Victory has not been found as well. And there's even older shipwrecks linked to exploration. This is an image of a dive that occurred in the 90s on the James Knight's vessel, the expedition that was lost in Hudson Bay, Albany, and Discovery. The second theme is whaling, which is not as well known, but also very important. And I've included here an image of the excavation of the San Juan Basque whaling vessels, which were found in Labrador and excavated in the 1980s. The conditions are basically subarctic. It's more or less the same. The season is a little longer, but it looks quite the same if you look at the images. And just to note that the logo of the UNESCO Convention for the Protection of Underwater Heritage has the research model of the Red Bay San Juan wreck in the center. There were a few whaling stations on Baffin Island. One here, we see a photo in the late 1800s of Blacklead Island, where Inuit actually worked on the whaling stations, either American or Scott. And there are some shipwrecks there associated with these harbors. This one here is in another one, Coquerton, which is just across Cumberland Sound. Quite a lot of remains. This is one that's on land, Maud Bight. This is way up in the Arctic, just entering Lancaster Sound. There are remains, presumably of a whaler. And the third theme is trading. Trading, there were some activities. This, what we're seeing here is the Maud, which was actually first an exploration ship that was bought by the Hudson Bay Company and sank in 1930 as a floating trading post, and was recovered a few years ago by the Norwegians and brought back to Norway in the town of Asker. The Emma is another trading vessel. Some remains have been found on land, presumably, but not the actual ship remains underwater. This one is a little further south, and you can see that because there are trees. And this is the Princess, a Hudson Bay Company post, which was broken up by the ice while it was wintering on shore in Hudson Bay. Inuit traditional activities. What's important to understand is the Inuit were, and the predecessors, the Thule, were actually very maritime cultures, and they were moving around and trying to get food, either caribou on land, but also seal and whales on the water. So there's a lot of those remains that testify of that culture. We don't have anything underwater yet, but you can see here one of the Northwest Territories, one of the Thule sites, and you see a lot of these seasonal tent rings, which are the rocks were used to hold the skins for the tents, and you find them all over the place. But they give you a very good image of how they occupied the territory. And you can see here there's no trees. Arctic logistics. A few, I'll go very quickly on those, but just to give you some of the concepts or some of the challenges. Seasonality. There's basically 2 seasons you can actually work in the Arctic. Spring, which is on the left, actually, this is spring in the Arctic. Winter, you cannot work in the winter, too cold, and also no light, no daylight, which is the opposite in the summer. In some places, if you're high enough, you'll have 24-hour daylight, which is nice to work, but actually it kind of actually makes you try to work 24 hours a day, because there's always light. But you depending on which one you choose to, there are some advantages, and there certainly are some disadvantages in some cases. I'll go through those quickly. Obviously, the big challenge if you're going by water with seasonality is the open season. It's less than 2 months really to work, and depending if you enter by the east, where you see the red arrow, that's the only way to come in, and you can't get in until often end of August, and then you only have a very limited window. If you come in by the west from Alaska, then you can enter earlier, but the trip is a lot longer. Depending on where you are, you can't get by ship. Can't get there by ship, so you basically need to get there by plane. So transportation, there's really by water or by the air. no roads, obviously. And the Twin Otter, as you see here, they can land just about anywhere, and they are the workhorse of the Arctic. But this is not a cheap venture. They also can land on skis on the ice, which is very convenient for doing operations through the ice, which have clear advantages as well. So you can see inside a Twin Otter here during one of the winter operations. Often Twin Otters can't get to places, so you have to basically stage your equipment with the Twin Otter and then mobilize by helicopter with slings of equipment, which is basically a lot of work. You carry gear all the time in the Arctic. Living, again, if you have a ship, it makes life a lot easier because you can live on the ship. But if not, you have to camp. But it's also a lot of equipment. And remember, in the Arctic, you have everything that comes in has to come out, even human waste. So it's a lot of gear. You have to account for almost 2 of everything. And then you can set up in these conditions here. Even though there's ice on the water, you can actually camp fairly easily on land. One of the things to keep in mind is polar bears. You always have to set up your camp accordingly to prevent. You can always see the tent that's further out. That's where the kitchen is. That's where the bears will go first, likely. So on the ice, different story. This is a camp that we had with the Canadian Army Defense and also the U.S. Contingent of the U.S. Air Force was there as well. And this is what it looks inside one of these tents. You're basically on the ice, so it's very cool, and you have to heat the tents. Another kind of model with dome tents, a lot more portable, and we did that for our ROV operations. For searching and surveying, there's obviously a lot of ways to do it. And I'll just show you, everything was tried in the Arctic. This is David Woodman's magnetometer survey done towing a sled from a snowmobile. But you can also equip just about any size of vessel, inflatable boats, ribs. We did just about everything, including icebreakers and Navy ships. ROV operations are a lot simpler. You basically go on the ice. The biggest challenge is to dig the hole, and after that, you just sit down. And whether it's cold, windy, or stormy, you can deploy your ROV down there. Diving gets complicated. Safety-wise, also, the diving is not too extravagant. I mean, it's cold water, but it's in case that you have an incident, you can be 2, 3, 4 days away from any support. Some of the early diving in the Arctic, this, believe it or not, was in a wetsuit, and these 2 guys were actually exited or evacuated because of hyperthermia, which is not a big surprise, but that was a project to find Franklin in 1967. But again, you have to be portable if you're flying in, and bring small compressors, tanks, and it's a balance of how much you can bring versus how much time you have. This is small boats, diving from small boats. We've done just about everything. You can basically, for small operations, get away with a small boat. But if you get serious, then you either have to go through the ice or have a barge with surface supply. That's to try to have a good time underwater, you need surface supply. For excavation, then things get really complicated. Obviously, if you're just mapping, not a big problem, but if you raise artifacts, then you need the dredges, you need a ship to be able to live aboard close to the site. Where we have a barge that you have to tow in and out. You can't leave it on site for the winter. They're wintering in the ice in Johaven. This is our work barge for the Erebus and Terror work, where we do surface supply from, and we do have a hyperbaric chamber on the barge in case there's a diving accident. Very quickly, just to show that the important thing is to get the recording. And fortunately, today with with photomosaics, but also multi-beam, we're able to get really good mapping of large sites very quickly. This is we've superimposed photomosaics and multi-beam with additional hand mapping. We're able to get some sub-centimeter accuracy and do this excavation in 3D. Basically, we can locate all the objects very accurately in 3D, and then overlay the ship's plans to give us, you know, an idea where we're on the ship. The preservation of the remains is incredible. The surface finds, you can find a lot of things on land, very dry, so the conditions are good for a lot of the types of materials, as you can see here, very small pieces. If you start digging, then you will find extremely good preservation, whether organics or small, but the soil there's permafrost. So basically you can't dig very deep before you hit frozen land. I'm not going to show the images of the human remains off Beachy Island, but if you want to see exactly what type of preservation there is, you can actually just type in Beachy Island graves, and you will see 3 of the Franklin expedition members. They're basically frozen in the permafrost, so they're basically mummies with their clothes, hair, eyes, everything. The preservation is just phenomenal in these conditions. The shallow underwater sites, depending on how shallow you are, if you're within 3 meters, what you'll find is that the shipwrecks are there, but they're basically flattened by the ice. You can see here some debris. If you are in 10 meters or 30 feet, you can see Investigator and Erebus. The 2 on the left are in the same depth, 10 meters of water, and they're standing up to the upper deck, except the upper deck has been cleared by the ice. But if you're deeper, as in HMS Terror, you can actually see the bowsprit is there and the masts are partly in place. This is HMS Erebus. In the red circle, you can actually a diver, just to give you the scale of how big these ships are and how well preserved they are. This is the stern of Erebus. And you can see on the upper deck, the ice did do some damage, but once the ice can't touch it, they're basically there. And same thing for HMS Investigator, which is even further north in the Arctic. The preservation of the artifacts, obviously, cold water is excellent for preserving artifacts. You can see some of the plates, some epaulettes from an officer's uniform. And for the deeper sites, then you can get something like this for HMS, for Breadalbane. HMS Terror, you can actually see the window panes on the stern gallery, even an outhouse toilet that was on deck that's still standing. And we were able to film inside the Terror, and you can see some of the cabins, bottles, and even the desk of the captain of the ship. Very briefly, I'm almost out of time, but I'll just skip through these. The challenges, climate change, of course. There's various aspects to it. Permafrost is melting. The erosion of the shorelines is massive because there is less ice. Melting ice doesn't protect sites as long. You know, some of these sites were protected almost year round, and now they're open, so that there's increased deterioration, particularly with storms who are basically impacting these sites that the ice doesn't protect anymore. Water temperatures going up, so there's new species coming in. So we're doing a lot of studies on some of these wrecks to see what the impact is. And tourism can have a negative impact. Tourists, the shiploads of cruise ships visit the sites. Fortunately, the governments have good systems in place to protect the sites. There's guidance, protocols, but the cruise lines are also very, very proactive. But you can see the benefits too. This is one cruise ship in watching some traditional dancing by some of the kids in Joe Haven, where that's a big income for the community. So there's a really good positive, but it can have an impact on sites. And the last one is pillaging of sites, which is an issue, not a big one because of the remoteness, but we do have programs involving Inuit to protect the sites like these sites. And I'll finish by just showing quickly some of the leadership attributes from the Inuit, how they participate and lead into the protection of heritage. There are 3 different territories. It's not only one territory, so the jurisdictions are different. Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and the Yukon. It's all based on oral tradition. They either have historic accounts that were recorded, but also a lot of the oral tradition is passed on, and that plays a great role in the heritage. We can see here some of the key members in Johaven and the elders as well. And the Nunavut is basically the one where most of the shipwrecks are, and they are very structured. The permitting system is very solid, and they're very involved in the protection. There's building capacity that you have to do. We do that either in archaeology, in environment, or also protection and other accounts or capturing oral history. And it's important to engage the communities either through schools or visits on the ships, which we do all the time. But we pay attention to the kids a lot because there's a lot of them and they're the future. So thank you very much. And sorry if I was just about 20 some minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Marc-Andre. You can see I put my thumbs up. I couldn't put all 10 fingers up, but a reminder, I think, me personally, I remember some of the early shipwrecks that were found in the Arctic years ago. Those particularly, I can't remember the name now, but one investigated by the One Atmosphere suit, the Jim suit, the WASP. Those are the early memories I have in underwater cultural heritage in that part of the world. And I think despite my knowledge and my friendship with Marc-Andre, I'm constantly amazed at how much work they've done. Everybody tends to focus on Erebus and Terra, but you can see the multiplicity, the expansion of the project to cover all those different, the trade, the expansion, looking for the famous Northwest Passage. All of those complement each other and provide a much bigger overview of what is not just a single site, but an underwater cultural heritage landscape that spans.
Chris just froze. Can you hear me, Ken?
It seems that, okay.
Yeah,
okay, Chris.
I can maybe answer some of that very quickly. Actually, we were looking at it as a big landscape. It's not, Erebus and Terra and Franklin are part of a bigger story. And believe it or not, the Inuit want us to investigate the entire story. They don't want to focus on those 2 wrecks. For them, it's important because you got to keep in mind, a lot of these encounters between the British and the Inuit were the first time they were meeting each other. So for the Inuit, it's extremely important because it's part of how the 2 cultures met.
Yes, and if I may come back on Marc-Andre for a second, I think this is also a developing theme in underwater cultural heritage, the concept of intangible heritage that are particularly important to indigenous communities. I'm hearing this in Africa and other parts of the world. So we have our typical story, our tangible heritage that I think has been prominent over the past years, but I think we're also moving into this parallel universe of the importance of intangible heritage. And I think that's really exciting.
Yes, and just to add, the Inuit Heritage Trust, in parallel to the archaeological work, are doing a oral history project and publication coming out soon on the oral tradition, oral histories, and how that links with the archaeology.
Yeah, and if I can just make one other point, which the whole webinar series is in celebration of the 20 years of the UNESCO Convention, is in the review of the convention in 2019, it's interesting that this concept of intangible heritage is being raising its importance. And just to add something from ICOMOS, is ICOMOS has just formed its own intangible heritage charter, which is going through the process of ratification through the ICOMOS process. So you can see that not only are we're looking at archaeology in a slightly broader context in terms of landscape, but tangible, intangible, and linking everything together is so super important, and definitely a way forward in the future as we progress into the decade of ocean science. And I think with that, you can have a whole seminar on the impact of climate action, climate change, SDG 13, and Decade of Ocean Science, SDG 14, are all encompassed within the story that Marc-Andre's outlined for us today. So super relevant, super modern, and represents a very today, let's say, approach to archaeology in its bigger sense within a landscape. Thanks, Marc-Andre, absolutely super.
Chris, there is a question from Jessica that she is wondering how you get your funding for these expeditions.
Well, the original search for the Franklin ships was basically funded by multiple sources. There was some government funding, but there's also a lot of the government entities that were departments that were coming together, but also universities and also private sector cruise ship 1 year. And basically everybody was pooling in some of the resources. The difficult thing is to get ship time, get resources. So what we did is we used the project not only for archaeology, but also for environment studies, catastrophe planning, and opening new navigation routes with the hydrography. So it was pooling of resources. After that, once the shipwrecks were found, there was a special budget attributed by the government of Canada to explore the shipwrecks. And particularly now, Erebus particularly is vulnerable to climate change. So there is funding to mitigate that.
Okay, thank you very much, Marc-Andre. Your presentation was exactly wonderful. If there is no question, may I skip to another speaker, Chris?
Yeah, please introduce Alok. Looking forward to this too.
Okay, I'm very proud to introduce Professor Alok Tripathi, and actually I know him from his publications mainly on anchors, because the anchors also my subject, and we have learned many important things on Indian Sea anchors from his publication. Professor Alok Tripathi is distinguished archaeologist and pioneer underwater archaeologist in India. He founded the Underwater Archaeology Wing in the Archaeological Survey of India and has directed several underwater excavations in the Arabian Sea as well as in the Bay of Bengal. He has worked as a research person in UNESCO Asia Pacific Field Schools for Underwater Archaeology in Sri Lanka. He holds equal authority in museology, art history, heritage management, art and architecture, remote sensing, and laws, and is the only social scientist listed among the 10 brightest young scientists in the country. Since 2009, he is a professor at Assam University, Silchar, and presently the director at the Center for Archaeology and Museology. Since 2003, he is representing India in ICOMOS ICUCH. Yes, Professor Tripathi, we are ready to listen to you. Your microphone is turned off in this moment, muted.
Good evening to all. Let me share my screen. Can you see this? Can you see?
Yes, yes, we see now, yes.
Okay, okay. So friends, today I am going to speak, as you know, about the underwater cultural heritage India. And as the subtitle itself says, it's just a survey of the explored site. As you know, India is a vast country. And this is my favorite quotation, which was published by the first Director General of Archaeological Survey of India in his first report. So in case if you find certain variations, what you have read and what you have heard about these sites and underwater cultural heritage, just remember it. I am not going because it was included for those who are not familiar with underwater cultural heritage. So just let's have a view of India. It's a vast country having more than 7,500 kilometer long coastline covered from 3 sides and very prominently placed in Indian Ocean. We have 1,197 islands and around 2.1 million square kilometer water area. Not only that, the maritime history, the recorded or known maritime history of India is more than 5,000 years, starting from so-called Indus civilization or the earliest Indian civilization. And the entire coastline is dotted with hundreds of major and minor ports, a number of settlements, and of course, the treasure ships. This is one of the map I have copied from one book, which is showing the location of treasure ships. And let me tell you, when we talk about India, archaeology and things, in India, generally the archaeologists are interested in the archaeology which is of 2nd, 3rd millennium BC. There are very few who are interested in historical archaeology or medieval archaeology or even this later period. So that is one of the reason, I believe that may be one of the reasons that not many people are interested in later sites, because the general perception is archaeology means something 1500 BCE and beyond. And that's the fascination of most of the archaeologists. So not only the marine archaeology, but even in internal waters, we have got various perennial navigable rivers having the ports. And there are a number of lakes and reservoirs, historical tanks and wells. Some of them even have been inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage. So there are numerous other water bodies, and therefore every state of the country has immense potential for underwater archaeological studies. Not only about the shipwrecks and the settlements, even for the nautical archaeology, we have a variety of evidence starting from the Mesolithic rock painting, Chalcolithic boat models and paintings, coins, seals, terracotta, sculptures. So we get, even in the art, a lot of information about the maritime activities, shipbuilding, navigation. I'm coming on the site. I just want to touch in very brief the history, how we developed underwater archaeology in the country. And I'm fortunate that I have seen its progress right from the beginning. Being the first underwater archaeologist, I was selected from the Archaeological Survey of India. So it was in 1981, the first geophysical survey was carried out in search of underwater archaeological remains of Tamil Nadu coast. That was done by the scientists in search of archaeological remains. And that was the time when UNCLOS came. So almost the same time when there was international developments, India was also awakening. We had no experience when underwater archaeology started. There was no long-term plan. It was just one beginning, and then another project started. Of course, the state funding was available right from the beginning, and a project, Marine Archaeological Studies in the Indian Water, started, and it started training archaeologists. So that was the very indigenous beginning in the country. This is the first report, the first project report of 1982. And these pictures, these are the early pictures of an submerged sites, which really fascinated the whole world, means the whole country. And there was a lot of interest was generated in underwater archaeology. So right from the very beginning, underwater archaeology became very popular among the masses. And then in the next decade, there were more training programs, there were involvement of more scientific institutions, archaeological institutions, and then the archaeologists were going deeper and deeper. So in 1980s, there were exploration up to 20 to 25 meter, but in 1990s, sites up to 40 meters were explored. Then there were advanced trainings abroad, and we had international exposure. And that was the time when ICOMOS Charter on Protection and Management of Underwater Cultural Heritage came. 2000 was not only the change of era in calendar only, but also for underwater archaeology. Underwater Archaeology Wing was established in 2001, and then it started regulating underwater archaeological activities. There were systematic training programs and planned underwater explorations. And these were the exploration which was as per the rules annexed with the UNESCO Convention, which also came in force from 2001. And right from the very beginning, what approach we took were that we collaborated with various government agencies having the equipments and know-how about the underwater diving or other things related with the sea or water. I would be just touching, as the title says, it's just a survey. There are a number of archaeological sites, there are a number of shipwrecks, there are a number of other remains which have been explored around the country. It's not possible even to name them or touch them in this brief presentation. I will be taking some representative sites and would be showing you some work which has been done there. One on the east coast, one on the west coast, one in internal waters, and one shipwreck. So the first shipwreck we investigated was Princess Royal. This is a site around 450 nautical mile off the western coast of India. It's a small coral island, uninhabited coral island, and there is this shipwreck of 18th century. This is the large anchor of the ship. And since we collaborated with Indian Navy, we utilized their survey ship to explore the outer reefs of these coral reefs. And we selected it for training purpose as well as to develop our techniques, because it has got a various terraces starting from 9 meter going up to 64 meter. So at different depths we had slowly we started from 9, then we moved to 15, then we moved to around 20, went to 30, and finally we went down to the 60 meter depth and worked successfully. For diving also, we used a specialized diving ship which has all state-of-the-art equipments, including decompression chamber, nitrox, a specialized medical team, helicopter, cranes, boats, everything. So we were very confident to work in any depth without any fear. And it was also our floating camp. And speedboats to survey the area, because it's a small island. If you can see the dark line here, it's a ½ kilometer long coral island, uninhabited. And then on the outer reef, we worked there. And we had a trained drivers, and they were given the brief training how to handle archaeological site and artifacts, not to disturb them. Right from the very beginning, we maintained in situ preservation, and we did not disturb the artifacts which were lying there, and they are still there. So different diving tools were used, and this is the beautiful coral reef there. The water is crystal clear. That's the reason you can have some nice pictures and can see every activity underwater. And we maintained, we had underwater cameras regularly monitoring every activity on the site, documented every artifact lying exposed on the bottom. They were numbered, documented without disturbing them, and they are still there. And then we laid out marked the area and selected some trenches for our excavation, just to see the state of the preservation of the wreck and what is the deposition there, because it has slipped down on all these terraces. So we just wanted to study, because everything is covered under these dead corals. So we used manual methods, we also used mechanical methods, and this is one of the cannon being cleared. And then we found 4 cannons, and it was this ship was carrying a number of cannons. So out of that 4 we could trace. And then we did not lift, because our purpose was not to salvage, just we wanted to see the shipwreck. We wanted to test our capabilities working in different depths, and up to 60 meter, we worked very successfully, very systematically. That gave us a lot of confidence to work on other sites. Then we selected a site on the eastern coast of India. And this site is again historically very important. This is a temple of the 7th, 8th century CE, and it is said to be an ancient port, which is mentioned in the Chinese and Indian sources. And there is a tradition, a city was there which has got submerged. So we wanted to see that. And when the water is low, you find this kind of architectural members suggesting that there were structures which have been damaged. And these are some of these structures which you see when the water is low. Since it was very close to the shore, we used amphibious ships which can come to the shore in very shallow water. And then we carried out the surveys, and there are some submerged rocks. And on these rocks, there are certain activities which suggest that there have been certain structures. So we carried out diving operations there and saw this kind of cuttings. And we had the similar signatures on the rocks on the coast, because there are these granite outcrops. And these outcrops have been used for various kind of artistic and architectural activities. And near these, we had the blocks, the slabs, with having clear indication that these submerged rocks were used for the construction activities. And we found that the tradition which have been managed there has been recorded by the European travelers and all about the other temples. It holds true. And on the basis of our studies and excavation on shore, we could find that what kind of a structure it could have been. And then it again generated a lot of interest, and it was not only because of the underwater cultural heritage, but also because this work was carried out just after the tsunami. So the media from all over the world came and recorded it. Dwarka, then we moved to the western coast. This is one of the sites where the underwater archaeological investigations are carried out right from the very beginning, from 1982. And this is one of the most famous underwater archaeological site. And we, again, very systematically surveyed the whole area using the survey ships. These are the survey boats having different remote sensing tools going very close to the shore and capturing the real-time data. So we selected an area of 2 nautical mile by 1 nautical mile where according to the ancient literature, city was located. The tradition is there was a city dating back to 2nd, 3rd or 4th millennium BCE. There are different views and dates, and this city was submerged. And this is mentioned in the famous epic Mahabharata. So we wanted to find out whether there are certain remains of that, or it's just a myth. So we carried out multi-beam sonar survey and the side scan survey, and then prepared a very detailed hydrographic map of that area, prepared 3-dimensional models, and then we started diving operations. And the whole, whatever you find underwater is overgrown with the vegetation. It had to be cleaned. And after cleaning, we could find the structural remains there. They are definitely remains of the buildings. And then all of these remains were systematically documented. They were drawn by various methods. And then only thing is that we could not find any datable material which could date these structures. And we also carried out excavation on shore and also in intertidal zone. So this is one of the very famous, or let me say the most famous underwater archaeological site in the country as on date. Then there was a general impression that when you talk about underwater archaeology, people generally take it as a marine archaeology and relate it to sea. And we know that there are a lot of underwater cultural heritage in many other internal water bodies. So to give them this message and to tell them, we decided to work in one of the lake. This is one of the a very famous lake in the northeastern region of the country, that is state known as Manipur, and it is a Loktak lake. And around this lake and in this lake, the Neolithic tools have been found, has been reported in the past, and we expect Neolithic settlement in and around this lake. And with that objectives, we explored this lake, and these are some of the settlement. Even today, people are living there, and they use that dugout canoes and live in these houses. And these are the floating islands, and they live on that. On with the water and the movement of the water, these islands move from place to place. So there is one of the very important area for underwater cultural heritage, not only for that remains, but to establish the chronology of the northeastern India, a very potential area for various archaeological problems. So that was the reason where we worked. Of course, the work could not be finished because of certain technical difficulties and a lot of weed, because this whole lake is full of weeds and it requires a lot of cleaning. But we did our initial work, and just to give the message that India, any state of India can work in the field of underwater archaeology. We have very few, we have certain challenges also, and one of the major challenges is the very limited number of underwater archaeologists. I don't feel very proud in saying that I am among a few underwater archaeologists. Actually, there should have been many more. And a country like India definitely needs several underwater archaeologists. And that is one of our focus. We are conducting brief training programs in universities and with other institutions. We are good in publications, a number of excavation reports, proceedings of the seminar, journals, special publications, and publications on maritime heritage galleries, etc. have been brought out, which have generated a lot of interest about the underwater archaeology in India. Another important area of underwater or related field is the traditional boat building. India is still fortunate that we are still having the traditional boat builders. And these traditions, we get evidence in the form of art, literature, and in many other forms, right from the very early period. Until that, these traditions continues. And this is the high time that we work on them and document them. Otherwise, they are going to vanish in very short time. We have a partnership with the Archaeological Survey of India, which is, of course, the central institution dedicated for archaeological activities. Then some of the universities have started underwater or marine archaeology, but it's in an initial stage. Then the scientific departments like Department of Ocean Development, Department of Science and Technology, Council of Industrial Research, they have also come forward, and National Institute of Oceanography, National Institute of Ocean Technology, Indian Navy, they all have, they are very keen and they have supported. So one of the impression in initial stage was that underwater archaeology is very expensive and one need to have the ships and equipments and you need a huge amount. But that we manage with that because the institutions which are having these infrastructure have been utilized and have been successfully utilized for the underwater cultural heritage. And that model proved very effective. So far, India has not ratified the convention, but the rules annexed to the convention have been adopted for implementation. And right from the beginning, the underwater archaeology wing saw that these rules are implemented. And since then, the underwater activities are properly monitored. Recently, the Niti Aayog, which is the main body for the planning in the country, has given a special emphasis on the development of underwater archaeology, which is a very hopeful thing. And now in this upcoming UN Decades of Ocean Science and Sustainable Development, we hope that underwater archaeology will get the boost which it requires. And for progressing ahead, we need functional centers in all coastal states because India is really a vast country. And let me tell you, you can expect any kind of underwater cultural heritage. I'm saying it with my experience. starting from the shipwreck dating back to the Bronze Age, what is called Indus civilization or Harappan culture. Then we have many other ancient kingdoms which has a very powerful navy, which have uh, gone both in the east and west, and there are every possibility that we may get the ships of those periods. And of course the large number of ships of English, British, French, Danish, Chinese, so they are there. We have done very limited explorations, and unfortunately that most of the Indian waters is undisturbed. There were some initial attempts by some treasure hunters to enter in Indian waters, but successfully government of India took a very firm stand, and no treasure hunting is allowed in this country so far. So whatever underwater cultural heritage is there, it's preserved. But now, as the diving is slowly becoming more popular, we have to see that we take care of it and we document it at least for its preservation, which requires training of staff, a large number of archaeologists, uh, the national law on underwater cultural heritage. Right now, we are monitoring all the activities as per the national law for the monuments and archaeological sites. And then we need to have sharing of information and resources, which we used practically, and it proved very successful. So we know that Indian Ocean forms an important part of our cultural heritage, and we need to develop comprehensive strategies to preserve this our cultural heritage. Most of this is unknown, and so we have to make extra efforts to search, explore, and then document them. And once we have that data, then we have to work for their preservation for the future generation. And for that, we need to raise more awareness of the cultural significance of the ocean. So with this brief, I think I have finished in the time allotted to me.
Thank you very much, Professor Tripathi. It was wonderful presentation, and we have learned many things on India and your research and excavation techniques. And I am also wondering many things related to Harappan cultures. Actually, did you find anything related to Harappan cultures in the Indian Ocean?
In Indian Ocean, of course, but not on Indian coast. We had a project to explore the area, particularly in the Gujarat region, which has been the main region of activities during Harappan. But on the other side of the Indian Ocean, on the Arabian Sea, in Oman, there were traces of a reed boat, and that was one project in which India participated. So based on the study of those impressions of reed bundles on the bitumen, that Magan boat was prepared. And then there was this was a part of experimental archaeology, and this boat sailed from Oman to India, and I was on that boat. But unfortunately, this boat sank on the way at night in the Arabian Sea, and we could not reach. Otherwise, we were supposed to land at the Gujarat coast. And we had a proposal to do the same thing in India because we have certain evidence about the Harappan boats. So to work on that and to make the replica of Harappan boat, or what you call the ship, Harappan ship, and then sell it in the sea to see the seaworthiness of these Harappan ships. So that was one of the project which is a very promising and fascinating. And I hope when we work seriously on some of the sites which are very close to coast, because on some of the Harappan sites, they have found indications of sort of jetties or landing places, and there are possibility. Lothal is one of the site which is interpreted as one of the earliest dockyard. So there are sites, and we have direct and indirect evidence of maritime activities and cross ocean connections. So we have to work in that field also. We have a lot of scope.
Yeah, thank you. It's amazing civilizations, actually. The one question from Mohammed Habib Reza, and he's asking that more about the inland work and process you have done.
Pardon?
Inland, he's wondering some details on inland works.
Inland, okay.
Yeah.
See, there are a number of known sites which we know. We know a number of riverine ports. We know a number of settlements in these lakes. And I was talking about particularly a lake which is in northeastern part of the country, in the Manipur. And there we expect, because this area we find the earliest civilization, or means earliest culture is the Neolithic. But being it's this area has a high humidity, very high rains, and because they were using wood and bamboos, even till date they didn't use any other thing than the wood and bamboo, so no remains survive on land. So only possibility is to find about these earliest settlements underwater. And for various reasons, they were living in and around this lake, because this lake was providing a variety of fish and other food things, weeds and other things, and it was safer. And then even today, people are living on these floating islands. So our search was we wanted to find out these earliest settlement in this region, because so far on the land we could not find any early remains other than the tools, because stone tools only survive and no other material. So only possibility is to find them underwater. And that was the project we started, and I hope in future we continue that, and I'm very hopeful that we may find very good results there.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Alok. Chris, would you like to add something?
I would actually. I'm fascinated by the presentation, Alok. Thank you very much. And Hakan's questions and questions from the floor. All excellent. I just picked out some highlights for myself. And apart from the incredible scope and potential of India, I'm actually looking at your publication in our forthcoming book, where it describes India with a coastline of more than 7,500 kilometers, 5,000 years of known maritime heritage, and 2.1 million square meters of sea, and well over 1,000 islands. And just as, you know, the title of your presentation doesn't do the scope of your work justice in a way, because I was impressed by the institutional cooperation and judging, you know, basing that on the necessity for cooperation, based on the enormity of the challenge you face in mapping the seas and waters and the inland waters of India. Incredible. I was also impressed that India has managed its UCH using the rules of the Annex. I think that's a very big step forward, and has managed to prevent treasure hunting from being active within Indian waters. And I think that's a very, you know, a very big plus for you, and leaves I suppose the scope open for future excavation without the knowledge of being sort of dug up by people who are just going to commercially exploit your heritage. I did note on a slight negative with the growth of scuba diving that there's going to be need for greater awareness of their activity and the awareness of the scuba diving community of the importance of underwater culture heritage, the training, the enormity of providing enough capacity to undertake your task. Incredible. I can't imagine the challenge you face. And those are the points, quite apart from the archaeology and the fascination, those were the challenges I saw and the way you were dealing with it. And I think you've done a fantastic job. And, you know, there's a huge interest in your part of the world and the archaeology that will come from it. So thank you very much. A pleasure listening to your presentation, Alok.
Thank you. Was there any question? Because in between the link was cut off, I couldn't listen the whole thing. So I heard your comments.
No, I didn't have a question for you, Alok. It was just to applaud your efforts
Okay.
in dealing with such a incredible broad scope of underwater cultural heritage in such a huge environment, and to face such a challenge with such enthusiasm. Amazing.
Yeah, we came at the end, it seems, when we have two amazing presentations from two distinguished colleagues from ICOMOS Aykuç. And for this opportunity, I also would like to thanks to Dr. Chris Underwood for his amazing moderating too. And now we wish to see all of our members and all of who listen us to fourth webinar of ICOMOS Aykuç next month. And thank you very much. Okay, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Hakan, and all participants for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all, and hope we continue this.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And I
thank you,
echo
Alok.
those. I echo those thanks as well. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And let's next time. This is not going to be the end of our webinar series by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, bye everybody.
Goodbye.